Part 1. The Peaceful Escape. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend. My friends and I had been planning this camping trip for months, just a chance to get away from the noise, the deadlines, and the constant buzz of city life. We had chosen a remote forest, far from any distractions, nestled deep in the mountains. The kind of place where you can truly disconnect and reset. We were all excited. The drive out had been full of laughter, music, and stories as we made our way into the wilderness. The sky was clear, the weather perfect, and the air was fresh with the earthy scent of pine. It felt like we were the only ones in the world, and I felt that sense of calm that comes with being surrounded by nature. We set up camp by a small creek, nestled among the tall pines. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. We built a fire and gathered around, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. It was everything I had imagined. Quiet, peaceful, and just the kind of escape we all needed. But something felt off. It wasn't anything specific, just a feeling that clung to the air, like the weight of the forest itself was pressing in on us. At first, I dismissed it as being overly sensitive. After all, we were in the woods at night, and it was normal for the atmosphere to shift in a place like this. But as the darkness crept in, I started to notice small things that didn't add up. The forest had grown unnervingly quiet. The usual sounds of insects and rustling leaves seemed to have vanished, leaving a suffocating silence. I tried to ignore it, but the stillness gnawed at my nerves. Part 2, the first signs. By the second night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We had ventured out earlier in the day to explore the trails and had found a small clearing just beyond the creek. We decided to take a walk there, our usual routine of chatting and laughing keeping the mood light. But as we moved deeper into the woods, something changed. At first, it was just a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. I figured it was just a deer or some other animal, but it happened again. Something or someone was following us. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "See what?" Sarah, my friend, asked, her eyes scanning the woods. I paused, squinting through the trees. I had thought I saw a shadow moving between the trunks, something tall and dark, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. "Never mind," I muttered, shaking it off. It was probably just the wind. But the feeling didn't go away. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. We continued walking, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease. But the forest felt too close. The trees were too thick, the shadows too deep. Every sound seemed amplified, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. The stillness I had experienced the night before was gone, replaced by an eerie quiet that was broken only by our footsteps and the occasional call of a distant bird. Then it happened again. A shadow, not in the corner of my vision this time, but right in front of me. I froze, my blood running cold. There was no mistaking it, a figure, tall and thin, standing between two trees, barely visible in the dark. I gasped, stepping back. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Sarah and the others stopped, looking at me like I was crazy. "What are you talking about?" Josh asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. I pointed, my hand trembling. "Right there, a figure. It's standing between the trees." But when they looked, there was nothing. They laughed it off, assuming I had imagined it. After all, it was a dark forest, and we were probably just getting spooked by the shadows. I tried to laugh with them, but deep down, I knew something was off. I couldn't shake the image of that shadow, the figure that hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but had somehow watched us. We made our way back to camp, but the unease lingered. My thoughts kept drifting back to the figure in the trees, to the stillness that pressed in on us. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like the forest was watching us, waiting. Part 3. The Shadow in the Pines. That night we sat around the fire again, but it wasn't the same. The warmth from the flames didn't seem to reach me. It felt like I was cold from the inside out. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that figure again. I tried to shake it off. We were just tired. It had been a long day of hiking. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't help but feel the eyes of the forest on me. Around midnight, as the fire burned low, we decided to head to bed. We were all exhausted, but as I crawled into my tent, I couldn't fall asleep. The sounds of the forest were still muted, too quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow in my mind, standing between the trees, unmoving, waiting. I don't know how long I lay there, but at some point I heard something, soft footsteps like someone walking outside my tent. I held my breath, straining to hear. It was faint at first, just a soft shuffle, but it grew louder, step after step coming closer to my tent. I was too afraid to move, too afraid to make a sound. The footsteps stopped right outside, and I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. For a moment there was complete silence. Then I heard a voice, a whisper barely audible coming from just outside. "Help me!" I froze. It wasn't one of my friends. It was a voice, hoarse and strained, like someone in pain. "Help me!" it repeated, almost pleading. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no more movement. The voice faded, and the footsteps disappeared into the night. The next morning, I rushed to the campfire, shaking, my nerves shot. I tried to tell my friends about the voice, but none of them had heard anything. I couldn't even convince them that something was wrong with the forest. But that night, when we returned to the clearing, I knew I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, but I felt the eyes watching me from the trees. I kept expecting that shadow to emerge again, but it didn't. Instead, the forest stayed silent. We packed up and left the next day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. That shadow, whatever it was, had never left the forest. It still watches somewhere in the trees, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting hikers to pass through. Part 1. The Solo Hike. It was supposed to be a solo adventure, just me, my backpack, and a long scenic trail through a remote forest. I'd been hiking for years, and there was something about being alone in the wilderness that always cleared my head. I had planned the route meticulously, knowing the trail well enough from past hikes to feel confident. The forest had a reputation for being wild and untamed, but I wasn't worried. I loved the challenge, the solitude. Besides, I was only going to be out for a day, so I wasn't too concerned about getting lost. The first part of the hike was peaceful. The forest was dense, the trees thick with moss, their towering trunks casting long shadows in the early morning light. I felt a strange sense of calm as I walked through the forest, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots the only sound, save for the occasional call of a bird or rustle of the wind. I was in a rhythm, steady pace, steady breath. And I didn't think twice when I veered off the main trail to explore a narrower path that seemed to lead deeper into the woods. It was an instinctive decision, one of those moments when curiosity pulls you in, like the forest itself is calling. But as the minutes turned into hours, the path grew more overgrown. The trail became less defined, and the sounds of the forest shifted. It wasn't just the usual bird calls or rustling leaves anymore. It was the silence that started to press in, a deafening quiet that made me uneasy. I paused, listening. The wind had stopped. The trees stood motionless, as if holding their breath. It felt wrong. Shaking off the unease, I continued. I wasn't lost, at least not yet. But I couldn't help the nagging feeling at the back of my mind, the one that whispered that I had strayed too far off course. But I pushed it away, telling myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I pulled out my map and checked my compass. Everything seemed fine. I was still on track, but the feeling remained. The deeper I went, the thicker the woods became. The trees seemed to close in on me, casting long, dark shadows. Something about the landscape was changing. The path was becoming less and less familiar. It was almost as though the forest was intentionally reshaping itself around me. But that couldn't be right, could it? Part 2. The Odd Occurrences. I tried to ignore the growing discomfort and focused on the physical, on putting one foot in front of the other. But that didn't stop the feeling that something was off. The forest had become unnervingly quiet, and the usual sounds, the birds, the wind, the rustling of animals in the brush, had all disappeared. It was as though I had entered a different world entirely. I checked my watch. It was getting late. Later than I had realized. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting everything in a soft amber glow. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. At first I thought it was just the wind or the sound of my own feet, but no, there it was again, the faint crunch of leaves underfoot, Someone, or something, was walking behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing. No one. Just the same dense forest, stretching endlessly in every direction. I shook my head, chalking it up to my imagination. After all, I was alone in a forest. It wasn't unusual for my mind to play tricks on me, right? But the footsteps came again. This time I stopped. My heart began to race as I stood perfectly still, straining to hear any other sounds. The silence stretched out, thick and oppressive. Then, after a moment, I heard something else. Low, muffled whispers, like distant voices. They weren't loud, but they were there, swirling through the trees, like a secret being passed between the forest itself. I couldn't make out any words, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, desperate, like someone or something was calling to me from deep within the woods. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to leave, to find my way back to the trail and away from this place. But I didn't. I stayed. I couldn't explain why. Maybe I thought the whispers were just the wind. Maybe I was just too stubborn to admit that I was lost. But the longer I stayed, the more unsettling the situation became. The whispering didn't stop, and the footsteps behind me were now louder, closer. I started walking again, faster now, pushing my way through the underbrush. My heart was pounding. The eerie feeling was overwhelming, suffocating. Every step I took seemed to echo in the silence of the forest, and every sound, every rustle, felt like someone was right behind me, watching me. And then, out of nowhere, the whispers stopped. The sudden silence was like a slap in the face. I stopped dead in my tracks. The forest was completely still. Not a single sound, not even a breeze. It was at that moment that I realized I was completely alone. I wasn't hearing footsteps behind me. There was no one else here. I was trapped in the forest, and I didn't know how to get out. Part 3. The Unseen Presence. Panic set in as I realized the full scope of the situation. I wasn't lost just physically. I was lost in a deeper, more terrifying sense. The forest had changed around me. It felt different, wrong. As though the landscape itself had shifted when I wasn't looking, locking me in. I looked at my map again, trying to find some familiar marker, some sign that I was close to the main trail. But nothing. The landmarks I had seen earlier. Nothing. The forest had closed in around me, the trees forming an endless wall of green and brown. It was like the forest was a living thing, shifting to keep me from finding my way out. As the light began to fade, I started running, desperately trying to retrace my steps, but every direction felt the same. The trees were too dense, the underbrush too thick. The whispers returned, louder this time, coming from all around me. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel them, something, closing in. I knew something was there, but I couldn't see it. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw a figure ahead of me. Someone standing in the clearing. It was a person. A man dressed in hiking gear. He didn't move, just stood there, looking directly at me. I could barely make out his features in the dimming light, but there was something unsettling about the way he just stood there, unmoving. "Hey!" I shouted, running toward him, relief flooding through me. "I'm lost. Can you help me get out of here?" But as I got closer, the figure didn't budge. It didn't even acknowledge me. I stopped in front of him, my breath catching in my throat. The man was dead. His eyes were wide open, but lifeless, staring into nothing. His clothes were tattered, his body pale and decayed. I gasped, stumbling backward, my heart racing. The figure wasn't real. It was just a manifestation, a part of the forest, part of whatever force had trapped me here. I turned and ran, but this time the forest seemed to close in even tighter, the path twisting and turning, leading me deeper into the unknown. My mind was reeling, my body exhausted from the panic, but I kept moving, kept running, not knowing what was chasing me or what I was running from. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I emerged from the trees and found myself at the edge of the forest. My legs were shaking, my breath ragged as I stumbled into an open field, gasping for air. But when I turned back to look at the woods, I saw something in the distance. The figure, standing at the edge of the trees watching me, and I knew that, whatever that forest was, it hadn't let me go. Not completely. Part 1. The Challenge. We were looking for an adventure. We had heard the stories. Every small town has its whispers, but this particular one had something about it that intrigued us. A local legend about a stretch of forest so dense, so dark that even the most seasoned hikers avoided it. They called it the Whistling Woods, not because of the birds or the wind, but because of the strange, eerie whistle that drifted through the trees. They said it was a sound you couldn't ignore, a sound that would follow you, no matter how far you ran. Naturally, we decided to hike through it. It wasn't just curiosity that drew us in. It was a challenge. Our group loved testing our limits, seeing how far we could go, how much we could endure. We weren't the kind of people who believed in ghost stories or legends. We thought of it all as just that, stories. We figured the whistle was nothing more than the wind making the trees creak, maybe the sound of a distant animal. So we packed our bags, grabbed our gear, and headed into the woods, prepared for an easy hike and a good story to tell later. The forest was beautiful, in a haunting kind of way. The trees were ancient, tall, and twisted, their branches reaching out like arms. The deeper we went, the darker it seemed to get. The air felt thicker here, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. But we laughed it off, taking photos, cracking jokes, and letting the day's light filter through the leaves above us. By the time we entered the heart of the woods, it was late afternoon. The atmosphere had changed. The air grew cooler, heavier, and a strange unease settled in. That was when we first heard it, the whistle. It wasn't loud at first, just a faint, high-pitched sound, carried by the breeze. It wasn't a bird, and it wasn't the wind. There was something wrong with it. It was too intentional. Like someone was standing just out of sight, whistling to get our attention. We all froze. "Did anyone else hear that?" I asked, my voice unnervingly quiet. "Yeah," replied Josh, a little too casually. "It's probably just the wind or something." But the whistle didn't stop. It lingered in the air, piercing the silence, drawing closer. "Let's keep moving," Sarah said, nervously glancing around. She always had a way of pretending everything was fine, but I could see the unease in her eyes. We pushed on, but the whistle didn't stop. It followed us, coming from different directions as if it was moving with us, staying just far enough away to be unsettling, but never too far to be ignored. We quickened our pace, trying to shake off the feeling, but it only made things worse. The whistle seemed to grow louder, sharper, as though something or someone was getting closer. "Stop," I said suddenly, holding up my hand. "Do you hear that?" We all stood still, straining to listen. The whistle was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, filling the air, warping the quiet around us. It wasn't natural. We looked at each other, none of us sure what to do. "What do you think it is?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head. I couldn't answer. Whatever it wasn't something any of us had prepared for. And that's when we heard it again, this time closer, clearer. A shrill, melodic whistle, so sharp that it made my skin crawl. It was coming from the woods, just ahead. Part 2, the whistle grows. We had to keep moving, but as we did, I noticed something strange, the trees. They looked different. They had been straight, towering in a uniform fashion, but now they seemed bent, their branches twisted unnaturally. The shadows between them stretched too far, as if the forest itself was closing in on us. Josh was the first to break the silence. "This isn't right. We need to turn back." But as we turned to leave, the whistle came again. It was louder now, louder than before. It wasn't just a distant noise anymore. It was all around us. It was as though the forest itself was whistling at us, warning us, mocking us. "What the hell is going on?" I muttered under my breath. "Guys, listen," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you hear it?" We stopped dead in our tracks. The whistle was gone, but now there was something else. A rustling sound, like something or someone was moving through the trees, just out of sight. I turned around, scanning the forest. There was nothing there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cutting through the silence. "Is someone there?" No response. Just the sound of the forest, the soft rustling of the leaves. It was almost like it was teasing us, playing with our fear. We moved faster now, our pace quickening with every passing moment, but the whistle stayed with us. It was like it was following us, matching our every step. That's when the trees began to change. They were no longer familiar, no longer just trees. Their shapes began to warp, twisting in ways that didn't seem natural. I could hear the groaning of the wood, as if the trees themselves were alive. The whistling grew louder again, and I could feel it vibrating in my chest now, as though it was coming from the very heart of the forest. We had to get out of there, but the forest didn't want to let us go. Suddenly, the air shifted. The temperature dropped by several degrees. I could see my breath in the cold air, and I felt it. Something was watching us. Something was there, lurking in the shadows, just waiting for us to make a mistake. As I glanced around, I noticed something in the distance, movement among the trees, figures darting between the trunks, just out of sight. But every time I looked directly at them, they were gone. We kept walking, but the atmosphere had shifted. The woods weren't just silent anymore, they were watching, waiting. We weren't alone anymore. Part 3, the final whistle. At this point, we were all beyond frightened. The whistle had grown so loud that it felt like it was vibrating through my bones. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was a presence, something that demanded attention. The woods had turned against us, and we could feel it closing in. We were lost. None of us knew the way back anymore. The paths we thought we knew were gone, replaced by twisted, unfamiliar trails. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers, faint but distinct, seemed to come from everywhere. They were getting closer. I broke into a run, my legs pumping, my heart hammering in my chest. The others followed, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if the figures in the trees were chasing us. I didn't want to know if something had finally emerged from the shadows. As I ran, I could hear the whistle again. And then a new sound, footsteps, not ours. They were matching our pace, coming from behind, but no one was there. The sound was unmistakable, slow, deliberate, like something was hunting us. Then I stumbled. I fell to the ground, my hands scraping against the dirt. I turned, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing between the trees. It wasn't like any person I had ever seen before. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long bony limbs, its face obscured by the shadow of the trees. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching us. I pushed myself up, adrenaline surging through me. I didn't care what it was. I didn't care if it was human or something else. I just knew I had to get out. I looked at Sarah, Josh, and the others. They were just as terrified as I was. We were trapped in the woods, with no way out. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whistle stopped. The silence was deafening. But we knew, without a doubt, that whatever was in those woods, it wasn't finished with us. We made it out of the forest, but none of us could explain what happened. The whistle never stopped haunting us, lingering in our memories like a melody that refused to fade. Even now, every time I step into a wooded area, I swear I hear it, the faintest whistle on the wind. And I know deep down that the woods are still watching. You may think you're safe, but the next time you step into a forest, take a moment. Listen. Pay attention to every creak of the trees, every whistle on the wind, because sometimes the forest isn't just a place of beauty. Sometimes it's a place where things you can't see are waiting for you to make a mistake. Be careful what you wander into next. Stay alert, stay safe, and remember, the woods are always listening.